Hello, my name is Annabelle Perez, Quality Improvement Director for Quality Insights Renal Network 3. As you're all aware, the 2020 network projects include long-term catheter reduction, increasing the number of patients dialyzing using a home modality, and increasing the number of patients on the transplant waitlist. Our approach will be focused on the patients the facility interdisciplinary team deems a candidate, or as we have titled, an opportunity for any of the three of the following options: obtaining a permanent access, whether it be an AV fistula or an AV graft, the patient is interested or a good candidate for home modality, and or the patient is interested or a good candidate for transplant waitlisting. I will explain how to review the patient level report we have developed for facilities to review and identify patients that are opportunities. We have also developed a tracker where facilities can log the patients identified and track their progress through the steps toward achieving each of the areas of focus. Please remember, only patients you identify as opportunities need to be reported on the tracker. This is the patient level report. The title is Facility Caseload with Access Type, Dialysis Setting, and Transplant Data. That basically encompasses all of the information on the report. At the top, you will have the CCN number, your facility provider number, your facility name and phone number. In the center, you will have the patients less than 75 years old at your facility, the number of patients less than 75 years old and waitlisted, and the current percent prevalent patient waitlist rate. Please be reminded this will be a CMS QIP measure for current year 2020. Moving down to the report contents, the first column, you have the patient name, you have the age, which will be helpful in identifying candidacy for transplant waitlisting, the date of first dialysis, the current access type for your identification of a candidacy for a permanent access, dialysis setting, whether it's in-center or home, UNOS data, transplant waitlisting data, includes the date waitlisted, if the patient is waitlisted, where the patient is waitlisted, if the patient is on the active transplant waitlist or not, the date the patient was removed from the active transplant waitlist, if the patient was removed, and the reason code for the removal. At the far right, you will see checkboxes where you will log if the patients are identified as opportunities for any or each of the areas identified. This patient level report also includes an instruction tool that we have developed that will provide more of a step-by-step description of the data on this report and points to consider during your review. We ask that your team thoughtfully reviews each patient on the patient level report and identifies some of the reasons, some of the opportunities that may be available for these patients for achieving one of the three options identified. The goals for the facility is timely referral and progress toward one of the three options of a permanent access, home modality, or transplant waitlisting. We ask that facilities monitor reasons why these opportunities may not progress, identify educational needs and processes needing improvement, educational needs of patients and staff. We ask that you perform your improvement planning with your Quality Improvement Committee, and that as you improve and as you make changes and implement processes, that you consider planning for sustainability by developing process and procedure that will hardwire the processes you've implemented and will help your facility in sustaining that improvement. Now I will move to the trackers developed for tracking the opportunities. So the tracker, as you will find, is an Excel workbook with various sheets at the bottom. The first sheet is the tracker instructions. We ask that you review the instructions before you begin logging the patients on the tracker. The first thing you're going to do is review the patient level report and identify the patients with opportunities for fistula, home, and transplant. We ask that you enter those patients in the main tracker, marking them with an X under the opportunity identified. You will then filter those patients and log those patients in the specific trackers for long-term catheter, home, and transplant. As you admit new patients, we ask that you assess them and identify if these patients admitted are opportunities for one of these options and add them to the appropriate tracker. On a monthly basis, you will be tracking and logging the step the patient is currently in, the step in the process, or you will enter a reason letter if they're not currently in any step. For instance, if a patient is deemed not a candidate upon evaluation, there's no need to continue tracking the patient. We will ask you to report the total number of patients in each step via an email survey link to be provided. And we will also like you to enter the total number of patients with a reason for not. As you monitor these patients in the process and you monitor their progress, we ask that you identify and address barriers to improvement during your quality improvement meeting. I'm going to move over to the main tracker, which is where you will initially log all the patients you've identified as opportunities. For purposes of this video, we have pre-entered some information. We ask that you sort the tracker and log the patients in the appropriate tracker. For example, Wonder Woman, Elastic Girl, and Catwoman are all candidates for fistula or graft. So as you can see, these have been brought over to the long-term catheter tracker. The same applies to the home and to the transplant tracker. You will bring over the patients you've identified for each of these areas to the appropriate tracker. I will go back to the long-term tracker to demonstrate the month-to-month tracking and logging. So we will take Wonder Woman as an example. In January, the patient was on step 1. In February, the patient has progressed to step 2, which is the first visit to the surgeon. In March, the patient is still in the first visit to the surgeon. So this may be due to a missed appointment, a canceled appointment, or some other reason. We ask that you monitor and identify the reasons why the patient did not progress to the next step, and that you identify and address any modifiable barrier along the way. At any given point, if as you track the patient is deemed not a candidate, you can enter a reason code. And if you note, each tracker will have the steps and the reasons for not being a candidate. At the very end of the workbook, there is a log form for the totals for each month. This is information we will ask you to report via the email survey. We do not need the names of the patients, we just need the total of patients in each step. Once you have completed the trackers and updated the status, you can bring over, copy over the total number of patients in each step or the reasons not a candidate on a month-to-month basis in preparation for reporting to the network. We realize you may have a vascular access coordinator, a home champion, and a transplant designee that may participate in the efforts to monitor the status of these patients. Therefore, you can provide each of those disciplines the patient tracker for their updating and monitoring. Ultimately, one person at the facility will be the one to respond to the email survey. So you will have to establish a process for gathering that information and preparing it for reporting. We hope this video was helpful. We welcome any feedback. Feel free to contact Verna de la Cruz, the lead for home and transplant, or myself, Annabelle Perez. I will be leading the catheter reduction efforts for any additional questions. I also invite you to visit our website, www.qirn3.org, for additional project tools and resources. Thank you.